Thank you, Bert. Burke, I wish I could say that welcome to everybody from sunny Basingstoke, but that's definitely not the case today. We're about 60 miles west of London, and it is grey, wet, damp and cold. But hopefully that won't affect what we're going to talk about, which hopefully is, should stimulate a little bit of warmth and excitement. Burke's done the introduction, so I won't bother with this. Just to add a couple of points. One is that in addition to my role as the Customer.co, I've recently joined an organization called the Customer Success Network. It's a free-to-join community based here in the UK, although we serve members around the world. Recently won an award from Workplace as the best community, small community, for its work in customer success. So I'd encourage you to join there. So let's get on with it then. Here's what I want to talk about today. And again, like Burke said, I would encourage you, if at any point you've got any questions, ask them in the chat window. So I'm going to talk a little bit around where customer success is from my perspective today, and what I see some of the major challenges that we are facing. I'm going to talk a little bit about product-led customer success, nothing other than an introduction to it, because it's a big topic, but I think it's a topic that's going to change the way that we think about customer success in the future. And then I'll share with you 2 or 3 points about where I think customer success is going in the longer term. Some of them are a little bit speculative, but hopefully might trigger a little bit of thought and possibly even some conversation and questions. By the way, these are all my own views. They're not always right, but I'd equally say they're not always wrong either. So let's get into it. This is data from an organization which I'd encourage you to go and take a look at, called Profitwell. Patrick Campbell there does some great research. He's I think a statistician and mathematician by training, and he's got a great database and publishes lots and lots of useful stats on SaaS. And this is one that he published last year, which is looking at the impact of customer success on net revenue retention. Now, the 3 lines, if you can't read it, the bottom line is there's no customer success at all. The middle line is there's some automated scalable customer success, and the top one is dedicated customer success. Now, the difference there is actually quite significant. The difference between having no customer success and customer success is about a 15% improvement in net revenue retention. Now, who wouldn't like to go to their CEO, their boss, and say, here's how you can generate a 50% improvement in net revenue retention from your existing customers? So we've made a good start. However, when you dig into the facts a little bit more, customer success only loosely correlates with churn. Now, it is a correlation, and it is a positive correlation. But the difference in what I think is our core role, which is about generating renewals, is less significant. That's important, by the way, for the revenue retention, because it's impossible to upsell a customer that churns. At least I've never found a way of doing that. If anyone's got one, please let me know. So what's my take on where we're at the moment? It's a relatively young discipline. I appointed my first CSM in 2005. There weren't many around at that time. It's still growing in terms of its understanding, but we've made a good start. But we do face some significant challenges, and I'd like to turn to some of those now. This is my first challenge. I know this is quite a popular model, the high touch, medium touch, tech touch model. I have great difficulty in recognizing the value of this as segmenting customers, because actually it's got very, very little, if anything, to do with customers at all. It's about how much they spend, nothing more than that. It says nothing about what their challenges are. It says nothing about what they're trying to achieve. It says nothing about what sort of people they are. It says nothing about how sophisticated they may be. And those are the things that I think should be driving our segmentation approach, not this. But think about what we do. We take this model and we build our contact plans on the back of it. Quite often not really thinking about whether that suits that particular type of customer at all. And segmentation is all about driving action. You know, segmentation grew up in marketing because marketing was trying to find a way to get actions, to deliver actions which were targeted to particular customers in particular stages. I think this is just far too simplistic and in some respects actually quite damaging. There's a second challenge we face, which is an extension of that, and that is many of the CS organizations I've come across don't deeply understand their customer. Some of them haven't even got their organization to be able to agree who their ideal customer is. But when you are in customer success, your starting point should be, who are our chosen customers? And what are their needs and expectations, and how can we help them meet that? And yet, we quite often build a relatively shallow understanding of our customers. We talk about a customer rather than the individuals, the roles, the users, decision makers within that. And I also think that quite often we confuse our desire for contact with a customer's need for help and support from us. A lot of what we do in customer success is because we need to show we've contacted a customer, not necessarily that we've got real reason for doing that. Now, I don't know if you've seen the research on the number of apps that many organizations have these days. There's a guy called Scott Brinker, I think he works for Marketo, but does a lot of work on marketing technology. And I think he calculated that most marketeers have something like 80 different apps if they're in an enterprise organization. Now imagine the customer at the end of that, working with, half that, let's say it's just 40 apps. And they've got a customer success manager from each of those companies wanting to contact them. They're not going to have a lot of time left to do their job. However, if we still really focus on their performance as an individual, as a user, as a decision maker, their role specifically, then we can really focus on their performance and get them some real help. And by the way, one of the ways you don't do that is by putting people on fixed journeys. It's a point I'll come back to later in the presentation. So let's start to think much more about our customers, who they are, what their challenges are, what their expectations are. Now, let's take performance focus. I believe customer success, there's an ad in the UK says it does what it says on the tin. Well, that's the truth with customer success. We should be delivering success to customers. And success to customers, in my mind, is measured by the value that they generate, the ROI that they achieve from using our products. But how many of us really measure that? We don't. What we tend to do is measure all these other points and infer from these points what the sphere looks like. It's actually a known syndrome called reification, where we try to ascribe meaning to something that actually doesn't have meaning in that sense. If we're in customer success, we have to find a way to measure success of our customers. Now, do we measure these other things as well? Absolutely we do, because they may be leading indicators of value. Equally, they may have no causal correlation whatever with value. So we need to think much more about what's the customer trying to achieve and how can we actually identify, track and manage and help them with that. So let's not stop measuring the points. Maybe we stop measuring some of them, but let's start to measure the sphere. Let's start to measure what's at the heart of customer success. This thing about value for customers, by the way, is not just because it's what it says on the tin, but again, going back to ProfitWell data, there is a relationship between gross churn and how people price their products and services and the focus that they put. And basically what this chart says that if you're working and selling around features, your churn will be higher than if you're working and selling around value metrics. So this focus on value is not just because it's what we should be doing, not just because it's what customer success says it is, but actually it's really good for our own companies as well. It's good for our results. And by the way, this difference between customer success as measured by the customer and customer success as measured by us is another of my pet peeves. I often go to CEOs and to CS leaders and say, how do you measure customer success? And they'll say, oh, it's net revenue retention, we measure gross churn, we measure logo churn, we measure upsell percentage expansion, we measure cost of success. And my reply is, that's good, but that's got nothing to do with customer success. That's your success. Let me repeat the question. How do you measure customer success? Next challenge. Stovepipes. Customers don't see these, by the way. Customers, when they look at your organization, they see an organization. They deal with an organization. They expect that what they've told you before, you've captured and you've used to their benefit and advantage, not that you've lost it. And when they deal with your organization, they expect that the left hand and the right hand know what each other are doing. And again, this is in my mind, this is a failure of leadership. Too often, we rely on leaders in individual areas to design their own processes. Now, many of them do that, and they do that well. They do that with good intentions, and they do that with the customer at heart. But they only do it in their stovepipe. If we're going to deliver customer success, we have to think about, for our ideal customers, what this engagement cycle looks like end to end. And the CEO has to take responsibility for that. Or at least someone on the leadership team has to take responsibility for driving that. It's a problem I faced at ClickTools. We had marketing, sales, customer success, product, finance, all trying to do the right thing. But because I'd let them, my mistake, I'd let them do their own thing, we were still losing people between the stovepipes. We were still losing people in the gaps. We were still annoying people. So we basically got the heads of those teams and some members of those teams together for a couple of days, sat them down and said, we're not leaving this room until we've figured out what that end-to-end cycle looks like. And if you want to know more about what we did there, there's an article, it's on my blog, it's called Avoiding Death by Stovepipes, and it describes the process that we went through. And it's not rocket science. All we did was say, okay, right from the beginning, right to the very end, what are the challenges that customers face and how can we help them meet their challenges? So our whole marketing process, our sales process, our customer success process was replaced by one end-to-end engagement process. Now, was marketing responsible for some of it? Yes. Was sales? Yes. Customer success? Yes. But we started customer in rather than process and company out. And once we figured out what they were trying to achieve, then we said, who's best equipped to address that? Oh, by the way, we also did some work about commission and compensation because they can also be real problems when it comes to exaggerating stovepipes. So customer success has to take a lead in taking this customer-wide view. Fifth challenge is one. This is actually a chart out of an ebook that I've published. And this is, I don't claim credit for this at all. This has been talked about quite a lot. But the difference between CS as a culture and CS as a team. Nick Mehta spoke about this at Pulse, certainly in Europe anyway. But there is a gap. The gap between what people talk about CS being and what it really is still quite significant. And it's incumbent on us in customer success to go out and to evangelize, not because we want to be the most important people in the organization, but because it's the right thing for the customer and it's the right thing for the company. I've updated this chart, by the way, and the link at the bottom, which is on the blog on my website, actually lists 16 points that I think describe an organization where CS really is part of the culture. So go and check that out if you want to know a little bit more. One final challenge I want to talk about is, are there better ways to scale? Now, we've talked about the simple segmentation model, the tech touch model. But unfortunately, and this goes back to one of the previous slide about CS as a team rather than a culture. This is a great book, by the way, if you haven't read it. It's by a guy called Chen Zhou. And he was, I think, one of the first 10 employees at Salesforce, and then went on to build a company called Zuora, who are subscription management software. And they've done an awful lot of work on what it means to run a subscription business. And this is a quote out of his book, which I recommend to everybody. It says, "We tend to meet each new challenge by creating a new stovepipe." And all too often, that's what we've done in customer success. Whereas if we really understand customer success, it's not that the team's not important, it's that there's much more about that. And actually just throwing a team at it isn't the right way to do it, because that gives us a set of challenges around when we come to want to value the company. So investors value recurring revenue over services revenue. They value growth. They value profitability. And I think there are ways in which brings us onto starting to talk about product-led customer success, where we can scale our businesses, our SaaS businesses, much more effectively by thinking of customer success from the product out as well as the customer in. So let's just take a pause there. Burke, are there any questions in the chat that are worth addressing at this point?
Yeah, one question, just maybe explain from a high level once again, what was the stovepipe? Just so we had a few questions on that.
Yeah, sure. Let me just go back to the graphic. The stovepipe is when an organization really most organizations are made up of a marketing team, a sales team, a customer success team, a product team, an engineering team, a finance team, et cetera, et cetera. And the stovepipe is really just working within those departments. Nothing more than that. Now, the one thing about customers, as I said, is they don't see those separate departments. They understand that they're there, but one of the biggest frustrations customers have is, why do I have to put huge amounts of time and effort into navigating your company? You should do that for me. You should make it easy for me to do business with you. And part of that is not having just a purely narrow marketing view, a purely narrow customer success view. Now, do those teams and functionalities need to exist? Yes, they do. But they need to exist in an architecture, what I call the engagement cycle, which is designed as a whole. I once had a boss many years ago, and he had a wonderful saying. He said, I want this organization to be an organization where it's impossible for a customer to call a wrong number. And what he meant by that was, when a customer calls in, the person there takes ownership, knows enough about the company and its broader sense to be able to guide people to the right place. Can they answer all the questions? No, they can't. But I think part of the role of a CEO and part of the role of a leader is getting the whole organization to understand what customers are all about, what their challenges are, what issues they face, and how we're helping address those. And I think too often we take this just narrow view. And by the way, I think lots of customer success organizations are as guilty as this as some of the others. But I think what we're learning about customer success is you can't do it just within customer success. It's a contradiction in terms. Because the other thing is, if these other teams aren't helping to make the customer successful, why do they exist at all? Well, they shouldn't really. Well, then let's move them on. Let's redirect them to where they can help the customer and give us, greater productivity, greater profitability, and greater customer satisfaction. So I hope that answers that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Jonathan Cotton just says he kind of refers to this sometimes as maybe siloed approach to those processes you were discussing. I think another great point you brought up, David, was thinking about how we approach customer success from the customer side, not just the selfish, maybe business side, where, and you mentioned a few of those metrics, but so driving towards that impact, both on a business level and an emotional level. So yeah, you're answering that question. We'll move on because I want everyone to really get to hear your concept of product-led customer success. Okay. I'll take a few of these other questions and we'll add them to the end during the Q&A section. Keep on questions coming. Thanks.
Yeah. So let's start to turn to product-led customer success. Now, what I mean by product-led customer success is that you actually build a success process into the product. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. The starting point, however, whether you do product-led customer success or whether you do people-led customer success, and it's not an either or, by the way, it's always the balance between the two, is this process here. If you do not have a reliable, robust process for delivering value to your customers, all of your customers, that doesn't mean it's exactly the same process for everybody, then you're not in customer success. And I think it boils down to these 5 things. One is discovery. So starting to understand a little bit more about the customer, who they are, what their roles are. By the way, and when we talk about customers, I'm always talking about 2 things. I'm talking about the company, but the individuals as well. And I think one of the shifts that's underway at the moment is that we are starting to recognize more and more and more the importance of the user, not just the decision maker and the business. So discovery actually starts in marketing and sales, but we need a little bit more in customer success to be able to deliver success to the customer. What is success? Well, success is what their goals are. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about how we go about helping and achieve this. So we need to agree with them what a realistic return on investment is. Once we know those things, then we can start to say, okay, here's what you need to do to achieve success, the success plan. And then we'll work with you, the collaboration stage, to achieve those outcomes that we've set and agreed together. And then the final part is we'll monitor that. And we'll actually monitor 2 things. We'll monitor progress towards that goal. So if it's a cost saving, we'll monitor how far we are against that cost saving. If it's a number of leads, we'll manage how we are in terms of reaching the lead goal. But we'll also manage how we are progressing in delivering against that success plan. Because if we've got that plan in place, things are on it because they need to be done to achieve that success. So whether you are product-led or whether you are people-led, you still need this process. And if you want to dig a bit more than that, I'll give you a link at the end towards an online learning resource that I've started to create, of which that's one part. So I think what we're seeing now and what we're going to see more of in the future is a shift from this being something that a team does to something that a team does alongside the product. So I can start to see, and I already know companies that are building products where the starting point for what they're actually building is that success process, understanding the customer, understanding where they are, setting goals, helping them achieve that. So in a way, it's tech touch on steroids, but it's tech touch in the product, not just through other things. Will other channels still be applicable? Yes, they will. But I think much more of it being product-led. So you can see in the center here, those 5 circles. Building the success work starts with building a deep understanding of the customer, who they are, what roles they play, what goals they've got individually and collectively as a business, what work they do, what challenges they face. And then the other thing is, who else has tackled these problems and how have they been successful? What does best practice actually look like? And I think going back to one thing I said earlier, one of the challenges is that we don't put enough time and effort into understanding our customers in depth, because that's the foundation for the success process. And then we start to say, okay, well, we enact that as a journey, or we enact that as next best actions. It's basically a data-driven approach. And again, it's something I'll return to a little bit later. And then how are we going to implement it? Well, if we're going to do it with people, we need to think about what sort of resources and content we need. But one thing I want to spend a little bit more time on now is how do we actually then start to productize that? Now, I share this picture because you can't productize unless you've done that deep customer understanding and sketched out what that success process looks like. So that's the starting point for productizing customer success. And here's just a couple of examples. So what we're talking about doing is saying, at the moment, we've got the product and we've got success management as a process, as a capability. And there's not a huge amount of overlap between the two. What's happening, and I think what will happen more, is that these 2 things will become much more closely integrated. By which I mean, much more will become part of the product. Now, the reason for this is, and the reason, by the way, for this deep customer understanding is there's often a big gap between what our products are capable of delivering to customers and what they actually achieve. Now, if you saw the picture of me at the beginning, you'll notice the grey hairs, and that's not makeup, that's real. I've earned those, every one of them, although there are increasingly fewer of them. I've been around quite a while. My experience says that very, very rarely does technology alone make meaningful change. Once you change technology, you also have to look at how do you change processes to best exploit that technology. And how do you change the organization, the skills of the people, what they do, how they're measured, how they're goaled and compensated. And if we're going to drive customers to their outcomes, to their goals, then we have to recognize that part of our task is to help them through those stages, through those challenges. Now, some of it is easy and some of it is difficult. The easy bit is how to use the features. And by the way, it's where most customer success organizations are these days. They're still down in the weeds about how do you use this product best. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an essential starting point. My point here is it can't be an essential end point. Unless you go beyond the product, get into process change and helping the customer change those processes, guiding them through organizational change, then they're not going to get the potential and the outcome that they want. And therefore, what happens? Well, it's likely to be churn. And I know this because I've seen it. I worked with one company, a SaaS company in the marketing space. Their software was about creating leads. And it was all about website traffic. The problem was that their software wasn't effective unless the customer could drive traffic to the website. Because if there's no website traffic, what they did wasn't any use. So to make those customers successful, you really had to help customers understand things like SEO, organic search, all those traffic generating techniques. Because if they didn't have that, anything else was just worthless. They could use the product, but they weren't going to get any value out of it. And I also put easy and difficult because easy is where you start in terms of productizing customer success. And I suspect there's quite a lot of people doing that. But I make the point again, how do you get to make the changes that higher up that value potential? So here's a couple of simple examples. Reich, they are in the project management business, and they use a nice conversational tool to collect data from customers early on in that relationship. I actually think they use a product called Typeform, but they've embedded it into their app. So as far as the user's concerned, it's just a part of the app. And using other people's products, by the way, I think is a great way to get some of this work started. The other point I make there is that all this data we're collecting, we have to collect and we have to store, we have to build as part of our single customer view. And there's two reasons for that, and I'll come on to those a little later. Benchmark and goals. So if we try to get a customer to their desired outcome, to their goal, to their ROI, you'd think the natural thing is to say, well, what's your goal? I think that's the wrong thing to do. I think the right thing to do is said, based on what we know about your company, what we know about how you operate, what we know about your sophistication, what we know about companies of your size and type, excuse me, this is what your goal should be. So we should actually prescribe goals initially. Can customers change them? Yes. But if your experience and all your data says, well, you're currently at 10, a good goal for you will be 20, and the customer turns around and says, no, I want 100. Your job, our job in customer success is to say, no, that's not achievable at the first step. Let's aim for 20. Let's aim for 25. It's a bit of a stretch, but we'll go for 25. And then we actually start to guide people in their goals. And then, of course, the whole plan and collaboration piece is about how you do that. Now, there are relatively few people who've done that. I know of one who's building that, as I say, the whole product around this. But at the moment, it's not in a shape where I can share that. But trust me when I tell you, building that broad collaboration process, that broad success plan into the product, including things that are outside the product, is happening. And one of the keys I can tell you now, by the way, are effective APIs to pull data into your app from other apps. So, for example, from CRM or from some of their finance or manufacturing systems, depending on what your product use case is. This is an area which, again, I think is low-hanging fruit. This is the last stage of that 5-step success process, of that success dashboard. This is actually a live example from a company called Receptive.io. They're a company based in the UK, and they do customer feedback with perhaps a little bit more of a product bent. But last year, back end of last year, they built this success dashboard in, which shows each user, both the individual user and I think the customer as a whole also, how much money is being saved and what ROI they're getting on what they spent on that product. And I think this whole thing about ROI, where possible, the goals that we should set, we should try to find a way to put some monetary or at least some firm value on them. The other thing about building this process into the product, and this is you probably know this one, this is Trello. Trello, by the way, is a great tool for building that success process and linking it in from the product. But one of the things that all of these companies have got in common, and one of the things that's essential when you're building success into the product, is it has to look great and it has to be ridiculously easy to use. So increasingly, startups I found is spending huge amounts of money on design and usability, not just features. Because we're so used these days to be able to pick a piece of software. Burke and I were talking about children just before the start. We were both commenting how 3-year-olds can pick up a mobile phone and play games on it without ever contacting the customer success manager. And that's the level of ease of use that we have to get to. And I think we need to raise our ambitions in terms of what products look like and how they work very, very significantly. So why bother with this? Well, the simple answer is it's money. It's money for customers and it's money for us. Let's look at us side of it. I talked about the customers and about getting them to their goals. It's money for us because higher renewals, if we could get customers to their goals and prove that, then that affects churn. Sorry, it affects retention. Let's be more positive. Because the likelihood of people churning, if they've got success from the product, is less. I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm not saying it's zero, but it's less. And the other thing, by the way, is if I can say to customers, or even better, I can get customers to say to other people, oh, we've generated this ROI and I can prove it, the impact on word of mouth is going to be huge. The second thing is it's going to lower our costs. Because what we do is, by automating this process within the product, we free up people to do other things. By the way, let's be honest, I will be honest, we free up people not to do anything at all. So we will lower our overall headcount, we'll massively increase productivity, and we can lower management costs because the fewer people I've got, the fewer people I need to manage them. And the final piece of this in terms of valuations, and if you understand how valuations work for particularly SaaS companies, product revenue, recurring revenue, attracts higher valuation multiples than service revenues, and productizing scales better, more predictably. So I get more revenue, I get lower costs, and I get better quality revenue. And this all came to me when I was talking to a guy about money. In 2010, we were approached by SurveyMonkey to acquire a stake in my company, which was also a survey company called ClickTools. And I was sat down with the chief exec at the time, a guy called Dave Goldberg, and we'd agreed that we wanted to do a deal for 49% of the company, and it gets to the point where you're arguing about price. So I said to Dave, look, Dave, here's our revenue, here's our profitability, here's our growth. Profitability is on a little bit, but here's the projections on and what they're based on. We had a very, very rich business model, a scenario planning model. so we could show him what our assumptions were and how those assumptions worked out and what the risks in those assumptions were. And they turned around and said, yeah, Dave, I accept all of that. But look, you're saying this revenue, let's call it 10. Well, 1 of that is services. 9 of that is recurring product revenue. I don't really want the services revenue because it's not particularly valuable. And to grow that, I've got to put a lot of time and effort into it. And the other thing he said, by the way, is look at that 9 that you're getting. To support that 9, you've got this item in your P&L called customer support. Or you've got another one called customer success. So that's actually depressing your productivity. And that conversation depressed me a bit. We ended up doing a deal, and I think I got a fair price, and they obviously paid, so they thought they got a fair price. But it set me thinking. And actually, Dave was dead right. Because what they do a lot is try to productize a lot of what they've done. And I learned quite a lot from working with them over a few years about how important that's. And that's probably the root of where product-led customer success comes from. And if you want to test this out for your own company, this is a graph that's created from a little workbook that I built. And the workbook's an Excel spreadsheet, nothing's flash. It basically says, what's your recurring revenue? Are you making money on services? What multiples do you expect for that? What's the CSM cost? What does the developer cost? If I need X developers to build out this functionality, and I can shift X% of my workload from CSMs to product, what does that look like? And this is based on some figures for a medium-sized company, 100 million in ARR, 20% new business growth, and 10% gross churn. And look at the difference. So this is the impact on valuation by shifting towards product. It's the difference, by the way, not the actual. Massive. Over 5 years. What's that going to mean? I talked about fewer CSMs. Well, this is a little bit of a view. I think CS jobs will change as we take on more product-led customer success. I think we'll move from the traditional jobs on the left to ones that are on the right. So I think if we don't already have, we should have a product manager for the success process. It's that important. A product manager who can define it and can drive it, and then can start to give specs and that to the development team to build it. That person, to me, sits in customer success. I think we need an insights analyst. I think there's a huge benefit to be had by looking at the relationship between customers that get value, what they've done in the product, and what they've done in the success plan. And I think that relationship is hugely powerful. I know one company here in the UK, they service the SaaS software for servicing financial service advisors. They can show a relationship between what the customer does, what financial benefit the customer gets, and as a result, what financial benefit the company gets. So I think success insight analysts looking at that relationship, and it's also an area, by the way, that I think machine learning will be hugely influential and hugely powerful. Behavioral psychologist. Why do I think we need a behavioral psychologist? Well, if you follow software, you'll have seen quite a lot around the negative aspects of hooking people into things like social networks. There are people that believe that social networks could become the new cigarettes, in terms of addiction. But there's a positive side to behavioral psychology and how we form positive habits and how we motivate people to do the right sorts of things and how we nudge them to doing that. And as one of the areas that I'm looking at the moment is how we can use those sorts of techniques and build them into our software to actually create the right sort of positive motivations and drives. And I think we'll stop talking about CSMs, and I think we'll start talking about change counselors, because I think a lot of the basic stuff that we do, which if we're honest, is not really, it's neither challenging nor engaging for a lot of the people. I think we'll shift those to being much higher level, to engaging with users and decision makers in how to make that change. So taking some of the stuff that we learn from the behavioral psychologists that we can't productize, that we then use people to do. So that's where I think we are. Let me just share a couple of things, 3 things, where I think we're going in the next couple of years. The first is, I think we've got to kill off customer journeys. Now that might be a bit radical. The problem with a lot of customer journeys is that they are designed with only cursory information about the customer, and they're designed as, in most cases, as a linear track. You do this, then you do that, then you do that, then you do that. My experience is that customers don't work like that. They're much more iterative in what they do. And I think we get to the point where our data becomes much richer. So sentiment, how they're using the product, how they're progressing with their success plans, what value and ROI they're getting, and that we bring that together with the other information we've got about them, and that goes into an AI probably decision engine which says, based on who you are, where you are, what the data is telling us, this is what you should do next. So it's putting much more context into this next best action rather than, and I think there are people, I don't see it so much in customer success, but I do see it in other areas that are already starting to adopt that. I think that's coming to customer success. The next one is, if we are in customer success about delivering success to customers, which is measured in some sort of quantifiable value, then I think that's what we should be paid for. So if you look at the past, you know, back in the days when software was shipped out on disks and CDs, and I'm old enough to remember that, and that was replaced because Salesforce came along and said, no, actually there's a different way, it's called subscription businesses. And then people like Slack said, well, no, it's not actually just about paying a subscription. It's actually about paying a subscription, which is based on how much you use. And if you don't use it, you don't pay. Well, the next iteration of that is if you don't get value, you don't pay. Your salespeople have said, when they sold it to me, this is the value it's going to deliver. This is the benefit you're going to get. Okay, I'll pay when I get that benefit. And I think there are technologies and ideas around, and some brave people, and it's going to take brave people on both sides, that started to think, yeah. Why? Because I can gain an advantage. Because I moved the cost from being a simple linear OPEX cost to being a results outcomes oriented OPEX cost. Different beast. And I think the people that take some early steps in there might find they gain a significant advantage. Partly because they can only do that because they've got really rich value and activity relationship data, but also because why would people want to pay for something when they're not getting value from it? So there might be a first mover benefit there. Finally, you've all heard about driverless cars. Some of you may have been in them. I think we're going to head towards driverless success software. This concept of software that maintains itself, that starts to say, actually, no, this is what you should be doing and this is what you need to do. It's a long way off. I think it's probably 5 years off, but I think that's where we're heading for. And I think we've seen already companies operating at level 2 and level 3. So 2 is very commonplace. You know, linking out of the product into guides to help people. We've seen 3 starting to appear in terms of success dashboards. The next stage is, okay, well, based on what you've done, we're going to tell you what you should do. And it'll propose. And then they get to the stage where people will say, yeah, actually, well, you know, you've told me that, I've done it, you've told me that, just do it. So we'll get to a point where, because we can show this proven relationship between value and activity, the customer will say, okay, just do it. Long way off. So let me just wrap up. Takeaways. You're not in customer success if you don't have an ROI process, period. If you understand your customers better than your competition and you can drive that into that process, I think you've got a competitive advantage. Building this process into the product is, I think, the next wave of customer success because of the value it provides to customers. And by the way, they like it. You know, people don't like being constantly interrupted in their work. And people are doing it now. And I think that, together with the power that's shifting to customers and has been over the last 15 to 20 years, is going to put more and more and more focus on the value. You know, what do we sell? We sell a product. We don't sell a consultancy service. So consultants sell a consultancy service. SaaS businesses, the prime of what they sell is a product. Now, are some much more complex than others and need more help? Yes. And I think it will, you know, what I'm talking about here will start with some of the simpler, easier products. I think as we learn that, it'll get applied more widely. If you want some more, I have written an ebook on product-led customer success. The place to go for all of this, by the way, is thecustomer.co and my blog. All the articles that I've talked about. I've also started to develop an online action learning program. I think the content's pretty decent. I think the presentation and engagement style at the moment is crap. I don't meet my own goals in that, but I'm working on that. But there's some useful stuff in there. Things like the ROI process, things like how to develop the strategy, stuff like that. Finally, some words from two people much, much wiser than I. Bill Gates once said, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. And the other one is from an Englishman, much, much older, an Irishman, much, much older, George Bernard Shaw. He said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And I'll leave you by saying, I think I'd like to think of myself as an unreasonable man. Thank you.
Hey, David.
Any questions?
Yeah, that great presentation, getting people thinking about driving towards customer ROI from the outside in versus maybe that ROI you talked about, which is, retention growth and those numbers that we want to have. So that was awesome. One question I have from James Ulrich, and I thought that was a great question. And this is around the ROI conversation you brought up, which is how do we gather that ROI? But his question was, if we're going to drive to this ROI with customers, if they're incentivized to keep the value, the ROI they're getting from the product close to their vest, like how would you help people? It seems like sometimes they don't want to tell you, hey, we're saving thousands of dollars with you. But what are some thoughts you give to that comment? Because I think that is a challenge that we're faced with when we go after the ROI.
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think it's a conversation that starts very early on. I think it starts in marketing, where we start to talk about, and I don't think this language is new, that we start to talk how we work together, how we collaborate to help you achieve your success. And I think part of that is if we've built that expectation early on, and I'm a great believer, by the way, in having what I call success plan light as part of the sales process, then we're already setting that expectation. Now, so that's part of it, because there's two elements to the answer. One is we've got to just talk to customers and convince them that we're not doing this so that we look good. We're doing this to help you succeed. Oh, by the way, here's all the research that we've done, and here's all the data we've got that shows if you do these things, your potential to achieve this value is here. And if you go to behavioral psychologists, quite often the fear of missing out is the fear of not having something is greater than the fear of value. Sorry, the benefit of value. So if you go to someone and say, look, you're missing out here because you're not doing these things, because you're not giving us access. So I think we can play on some of those psychological points. The other thing is I think there's a technological element to that, and that is, which I mentioned briefly, is how do we look at bringing data into our app which will give us indicators of their success. So it actually is a product feature.
Yeah, I liked when you shared that dashboard of success. It almost was, just showing them the value across the whole user base built into the tool. So I think a success dashboard is actually a really cool thing. And there's a company called TurboTax, and as you're filling out your tax online, they're telling you how much you're saving at every step along the way, or how much you're getting back. So that's driving towards that point.
Yeah.
Yep. So
and imagine then TurboTax then starts to say, well, actually, don't do that, do this. And if you do this, you can save this much tax.
Yeah.
More tax, save more tax.
Yeah, driverless customer success there. I like that. That's an awesome concept. Another question I think people are having out there is, what would be your advice, or how would you help them move from feature training of the product to ROI or ROI attainment in customer success. Like you mentioned earlier, I do believe a lot of people are out there spending a lot of hours on how to use the drill versus how to put the pictures on the wall, and that's why we bought the drill.
Absolutely. Well, I think someone in a leadership position has got to take the lead and say, right, let's go out and really build a rich understanding of customers. And you build that, you bring that in, you codify that. And, you know, that's where you start training people. You start training people on, here's what a customer looks like. Here's what a customer does. This is what he has to do. This is what she has to do. This is what really keeps her awake at night. This is the challenges. And, you know, a big part for me of onboarding CSMs is that customer understanding. I was putting together some stuff for the webinar. I had a radical idea that said, I've got an idea. Why don't we just say to all CSMs, next week, you're going to make no outbound calls to customers at all. You can take inbound calls, but you're not going to make outbound calls. And all you're going to do is you're going to spend the whole of the CS team, everybody, is going to spend time in a room, not all together all at once, but, you know, with Post-its and with flip charts and all, writing down everything we know about customers. I think that would be a hugely useful exercise.
Yeah. I think getting to know what are customers' day in the life, what are the problems they're solving, really, truly is the key to driving. Like, I think that'd be a great challenge. So if you're out there, take that challenge from David and go with it.
Oh, by the way, at the same time, you know, invite as many customers as you can get to come and join you.
Yes. Yeah. That's great thought. Get their thoughts versus the inside out thinking, which sometimes can be part of an organization.
Yeah. We often make a mistake, Burke, that we think we know what customers want more than customers do.
Yeah.
Now, we might know some things better than they do, but we still don't know them better than them.
Yeah. Well, David, I appreciate your time. It's been awesome to, as we've come together across the world, to learn about product-led customer success, driving towards that ROI of impact, both on the business side and even the emotional side of each of us. I think it's been a really helpful exercise. I loved that 6-step process I think you showed earlier on how to actually develop the process. This webinar will be made live, the recording, so if you want to go back and reference anything that David said, you'll be able to view this, which we will send to you in the next day or so. We appreciate everyone who's joined us from all over the world. Customer success is needed, and it's not just a department like David said. It's an organization, from marketing to sales to customer success, driving ROI. And like David mentioned, the best SaaS companies will move towards, I think, this product-led customer success. And I think it will be a great world to be a part of as people participate in driving ROI and impact for their customers versus feature training. So thanks, David, for joining us. Wherever you are in the world, have a great day. Make it a great day. Customer success united is the key, and not just departments. So thanks a lot wherever you are, and we'll talk to you next at our next webinar series, which will be coming shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.